The American dream was simple. Work hard, save your money, and you will be secure. And for a decade, it seemed to work. The Roaring '20s, a time of jazz, electricity, and a stock market that seemed to only go up. But this was an illusion, built on a fragile foundation. Millions of ordinary people were borrowing money to gamble on the market. Stock prices were soaring far beyond what the companies themselves were actually worth. It had become a bubble, waiting for a pin. And in October 1929, that pin finally dropped. The stock market imploded. The biggest companies in the country were suddenly worth almost nothing. The bank doors were chained shut, meaning the life savings you thought you had in your account simply wasn't there anymore. The American dream, it was shattered. What do you do when the American dream itself goes bankrupt? During the Great Depression, an entire generation was forced to find an answer. And the answers they found weren't written in any textbook. Today, we are uncovering 5 of the most brutal and ingenious hustles that kept Americans alive. And the first one begins not in a factory or a boardroom, but on a lonely city street corner. Imagine you're a man who did everything right. You wore a good suit to a respectable job in an office downtown. You had a title, a salary, and a sense of your place in the world. Then the crash came, and all of it was erased. The job is gone. The title is meaningless. The good suit just hangs in your closet, a reminder of a life that no longer exists. And the thought of standing in a bread line, of taking a handout, feels like a kind of death. Then you hear about a strange opportunity. It turns out the International Apple Shippers Association has a problem. They have a massive surplus of apples and no one to sell them to. So they come up with a scheme. They offer to sell a crate of apples on credit to any unemployed man willing to work. A whole crate for about $1.75. Your only job is to sell them on the street for 5 cents a piece, and so you put on your old suit. You find a corner on a busy street, and you become one of the 6,000 apple sellers in New York City alone. And people bought them, because even in the depths of the Depression, 3 out of 4 people still had a job. Their wages were cut and they were terrified, but they still had a few cents to spare. For some, an apple was a cheap lunch. For others, it was a healthy dessert. But for everyone who bought one, it was also a small, dignified way to help a fellow citizen. This hustle was never really about the money. It was about the work. It was about looking another person in the eye and making a sale, not asking for charity. It was a way to hold on to the last, most important piece of their old lives, their dignity. It was a public battle for dignity, fought by individuals on the city streets. But for millions more, the front line of survival was much closer to home, in their own backyard. For millions in the cities and suburbs, the battle against hunger was fought in their own backyard. When the weekly grocery budget shrank to almost nothing, families turned to the soil. Empty lots, small patches behind apartments, and manicured front lawns were all torn up and repurposed. They became thrift gardens. This wasn't a hobby. It was a critical source of food. People planted hardy, high-yield vegetables like potatoes, beans, and tomatoes. They learned to can and preserve their harvest, stretching a summer's work across the entire year. Communities organized seed swaps, and neighbors shared their produce and their knowledge. It was a nationwide movement of self-reliance that put food on the table when the grocery store was no longer an option. A powerful lesson in creating your own security, starting with a handful of seeds. It was a quiet revolution of self-reliance. But for some, the need for cash was so extreme, it pushed them into a hustle that turned survival itself into a bizarre and painful public spectacle. Imagine a contest where the only skill required is your ability to suffer. Welcome to the dance marathon. The rules were simple, and they were brutal. To win a cash prize that could sometimes be over $1,000, a life-changing amount of money, you and a partner had to keep moving, dancing to the repetitive music for as long as you possibly could. You got a 15-minute break every few hours. But other than that, you could not stop. If your knee hit the floor, you were out. For days, that turned into weeks. That sometimes turned into months. The couples would shuffle across the dance floor. The paying crowds would watch as the contestants slowly broke down, hallucinating from sleep deprivation, crying from the sheer pain in their legs. But for the desperate people on the dance floor, it was a rational choice, because the promoter gave them free food, as many as 12 meals a day, and a roof over their heads. You were trading your pain and public humiliation for basic survival. In a strange way, it was one of the earliest forms of reality entertainment, a grim forerunner to the modern live streamer or content creator, monetizing their own life and endurance for an audience, all for a chance to pay the rent. But the fight for survival wasn't just fought in these grueling public contests. For mothers across the nation, the most creative hustles were happening behind closed doors. Imagine you're a mother in the 1930s. Your children are growing, but your wallet is empty. In the corner of your kitchen sits a humble cotton sack. And for you, it isn't just a container, it's a lifeline. Because you know that once the flour is gone, that rough piece of fabric can become a shirt, a diaper, or a new dress. The process itself was a true feat of patience. First, the seams were meticulously unpicked, the strings saved to be used later as thread. Then came the most difficult part, scrubbing the stubborn, heavy ink of the company logo out of the fabric with harsh lye soap. But then, something remarkable started to happen. The companies that made the flour noticed, and they started printing their sacks with colorful patterns. Suddenly, a trip to the general store was about choosing the prettiest pattern for your daughter's next dress. It was a way to find dignity and beauty, not in a department store, but at the bottom of a flour sack. It was perhaps the earliest example of a nationwide upcycling movement, a lesson in seeing every purchase not just for what it is, but for what it could become. It was a way to clothe children with dignity, but the most relentless battle inside the home was fought every single day in the kitchen. For many families, the daily battle was fought at the stovetop. It was a challenge of culinary alchemy, how to turn a handful of cheap ingredients into something that felt like a real meal. A staple of this era was a dish that became grimly known as Hoover stew, macaroni, sliced hot dogs, and canned tomatoes. But the true genius was in the desserts. You might ask a logical question. If apples were cheap, why a fake apple pie? The answer is brutal. Depression-era math. A full pie needs 2 to 3 pounds of them. That could cost over $1 for the apples alone, a full day's wages for some. So they turned to a brilliant substitute popularized by cracker companies. The mock apple pie, made from Ritz crackers, sugar, lemon juice, and cinnamon. It was a strange, brilliant, and affordable way to give a family the comfort of a sweet dessert in a world that had none. The 5-cent apple, the thrift garden, the dance marathon, the flour sack dress, the mock pie. These weren't just stories of survival. They are a powerful reminder that the greatest resource isn't what's in a bank vault, but the depth of human resourcefulness. These are the kinds of brutal and creative things an entire generation built from the pieces, and their playbook for survival is more relevant today than ever. To go deeper on the specific lessons we can pull from these hustles and apply to our own financial lives, check out my Substack,